over to Dr. Mahan.
Dr. Mahan.
I think we have, from our Friday memo, we have one item, actually, no, two items, and then a follow-up item to discuss on our CNI agendas today.
Yes, and I've asked Dr. Mann's going to walk up just to the podium just so it's easier for you all to see her and to talk, ask questions, have discussion. So Friday afternoon or Thursday afternoon in the weekly memo last week, Dr. Mahan and the folks in the curriculum office and Dr. Campisi had worked together, done quite a bit of research on kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, put together just a brief white paper, including some of the research about the advantages, challenges, with a full-day kindergarten program. Most cited or identified item in the Cherry Hill 2020 work that we initiated during the course of the fall. Was part of the presentation that Mrs. Sugars and I did in January, as well as part of the follow-up discussion that we had in our presentation at the end of May. So now Dr. Mahan is here to answer questions, entertain discussion about full-day kindergarten, see where you are, questions with it, before we take next steps and see what options are if we're so inclined to move forward with an implementation plan. So Dr. Mahan.
Into sections. So I started off just with a brief introduction of the district, who we are, how we got to this point, including reference to the 2020 vision work, the program that we currently offer, so what our students can actually receive here in Cherry Hill as a kindergarten student, what it looks like across the non-Title I and the Title I elementary schools, and then the breakdown of the academic day as it's currently delivered. Then I jumped into the research and the benefits of the full day K program. I started off with a brief literature review, and then after that you could see benefits of a full day K program broken down into 3 distinct areas, including instructional time, additional services that could potentially be offered, and then the impact on the curriculum, so what the students will be learning during the academic day. And then the last one was just local information that I received from the Department of Education in regards to how we compare in comparison to other school districts, not only in the county, but also across the state. So I utilized this format because after a discussion with Dr. Dickinson and Mr. Goodwin and Dr. Malash, they felt that this would be the most appropriate format to share the information out with you. So some of the items that weren't captured because the format really would not have been appropriate to include in a white paper, just that you should know. Dr. Malash and I have visited several school districts, local school districts in the area that offer full-day kindergarten. We've also spoken to several directors of curriculum who have really worked to implement full-day kindergarten in their districts, and we've not only addressed the cons, the pros, but also the cons of implementation of a program of this nature. So I don't know if you have any questions. Go ahead, Mr. Goen.
One question I have, and maybe it might just be a unique experience to my daughter, but one of the things that I thought was beneficial is the EDCC. My daughter ended up having the teacher in her EDCC class happened to be a kindergarten teacher who didn't have a job
Okay.
or was looking for a job at the time. And I don't know, it seemed like she learned an awful lot. And I'm not sure if that was just a unique experience. Yeah, so I don't know if we're discounting what we already have. I mean, certainly you have to pay for that, but I'm wondering, is there any way we can kind of take what we already have in place and maybe somehow expand that or something, or if that's even been looked at in terms of what's going on in those EDCC programs, because it seems like from my experience, a lot of good stuff happening in those programs.
Do you want to address? My initial thought would be that the nature and the structure of EDCC looks very different from the kindergarten classroom. So the purpose that they serve is different. So one of the things that you saw and that I included in the research in the white paper is that there should be a certain level of social interaction and play for students, which we typically see in an EDCC type program. The largest comparison is that our kindergarten program is governed really by the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, and we have a curriculum that is followed that the teachers are teaching to our students on a daily basis. EDCC, so that there is not overlap in instruction, they are using other resources to support a full day type program, but it is not based on our New Jersey Student Learning Standards. So really the premise behind why we have EDCC is to offer another means for parents in terms of childcare so that they can have a full day program. But what you see in both of those look very different.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the things you cited under the local information section was that in Camden County, we're only one of 3 school districts that has half-day kindergarten today, and the other 2 you mentioned were Haddonfield and Haddon Heights.
Correct.
Are either of those districts considering it, or are they in the same stage we are, or are they just keeping it status quo, as far as you know?
As far as I know, they both have considered it, but I have not moved forward in those conversations. They were a part of initial conversations that we had. I have not circled back to them.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Judd?
This is more a comment than a question, but I was surprised when I did the math under local information that 72% of the school districts in the state offer full day. So that's almost, the difference is, more than 25% don't. I actually always heard that there were less than 100. And when I went to school board meetings, I always heard there was less than 100 districts that don't offer full day. So that was a surprise to me, that it's more than what is being stated out there at meetings or whatever. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Dr. Manos listened here that 80 offer half-day programs. Right? Is that what you're looking at, Ken?
584 districts, 423 offer full day. I did the math between 484 and 584, and it was 72%. At least I think I did the math right.
Okay.
You know me and math.
I do.
So whatever.
Mrs.
So I'll do the math again later.
So,
Okay.
Mrs. Judge, just to kind of speak to what you're saying, when I went through, the numbers didn't necessarily add up all the way. So I believe that these numbers are accounting for, they include like high school districts only. So there may be districts included in this number, so your percentages may actually be accurate in terms of if every single one of those districts offered kindergarten. But we have some districts, for example, a local district that you would know, Lenape Regional High School, they don't offer K. So although they're included in the numbers in terms of a district, they really would not even be eligible to offer a kindergarten program. So just something to consider in your math. Welcome. Go ahead, Jean.
Just trying to provide clarification.
Yeah. Mrs. Scarpolino?
Of the other districts in South Jersey that you spoke with, how do they implement their full-day kindergarten? Are they, in the same building with the elementary? Do they do kindergarten centers, or something completely different?
Okay. So the main one that just recently implemented was in Washington Township, and they did sort of a combination of both, and that was because their facilities could not adequately house additional K classes in all of their buildings. So some of their buildings have K classrooms and can house students, and they also have a K center. So their facilities, they actually recommended trying to house it in the schools in which the students are zoned for, but that is because they did not have a separate facility. The facility that they use for their K center is really not outfitted with full kitchen and things like that, a cafeteria, so they bring in a lot of resources to that school to make sure that the students get everything they need. In terms of resources, they have everything, but they have bathrooms and all the mandated stuff. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to talk bad about the district, but just in terms of making sure that, they have lunch that's, transported to the building every day for students to have. They have a space for students to eat lunch in every day. They eat in their classrooms. So just some logistical things that they were working through. The other is Gloucester Township, and they did implement in the buildings in which they have the program, so in their local schools. Mr. Tomlinson?
So we have the number one item being requested through 2020 being full-day kindergarten. We have the rationale why. Just wondering kind of where are we on the how are we going to implement it, and kind of early estimate or any kind of estimate on costs or changes that would need to happen to get us there.
So I'll start. Do you want to peek? Okay, so there has been a significant amount of conversation. As I said, we've been researching this over the last few years and going out to other districts and visiting programs and looking at the curricular impact as well as the facilities impact. So the cost piece I will leave to Dr. Malash and Mrs. Sugars, but I think we do know at this point that based on the numbers of sections that we would need, all of our schools cannot hold the additional sections that would be needed. So has there been conversation? Yes. Have we thought about the long range piece? I'll defer to Dr. Malash.
Right, so and thank you, Farah, and you're correct with where you are. We can't implement full-day kindergarten in our facilities the way that we're currently configured. We just can't. Now, there are options to do that, right? We can put additions on the schools that currently don't have space, because we have some schools that we could put full-day kindergarten in September, and there's space there to do it. But we can't do that across the district the way that we are currently configured with our 12 elementary schools. So there's two pieces, and this is why we have the discussion now with the board, to come through. One is the board committed to implementation of full-day kindergarten? It is really the biggest question to go forward with it.
I guess my point is I don't think I can get to that conclusion without the information that of what are the options out there, what are the changes that need to happen.
Right.
The rationale of the why, absolutely. If we could do it in September, yes, we should do it in September. But it's at what cost is kind of what the big thing is.
So again, in my mind, those are two separate things. If we as a district, if we believe that this is critically one of the most important things that we need to do, then we need to decide that, and then we need to find out a way that's going to work for our community to implement that. It is the biggest piece, and that's still where we vacillate. I mean, and you've heard me talk about it. If I could implement full-day kindergarten across the district for September 1st, 2017, I would. I can't, right? The crown just has not arrived, no matter how many times I keep looking. So the big piece is the board committed to doing that? Because then if they are, then we go into the hard and fast of here's where the numbers are, in one piece. And by numbers, I mean numbers of children, anticipated numbers of children. You are all aware that there's quite a bit of construction that has been initiated and that is slated to occur in our community during the course of the next few years. And what are the implications for that, to go through? And how are we currently organized in terms of where we are? But that really is, that's my pushback on you all as the board. Are you as a 9-member group, are you committed to doing it? And that's where this discussion comes through with it. Because I believe that if you believe that this is critically important and we need to do this, then we will do it. It's just a matter of figuring out where that is, and you're right, those are the questions. But if we believe that it's the right thing to do, but what's the cost? Is there a cost figure that goes in? Those are the other pieces of it.
Is there any talk from a state level about full-day kindergarten where they make it a mandate, and where this decision is going to be made for us, where we may be looking at playing catch-up versus getting ahead of full-day kindergarten?
So I'm going to let Farah answer. I'm going to start with kindergarten is not mandated by the state. Any kindergarten is not mandated by the state as across the board. Let Farah go from there.
I was just going to say it is not mandated across the state. As Dr. Malash said, there has been really a big push for preschool programs, which would ultimately probably segue into full-day K. There has been discussion, but there has been no concrete deadline in terms of when implementation would be. But that doesn't say that we would not be told by the DOE that we have to implement, 2018 and you figure it out. So I think we just need to be mindful of.
This,
full-day
this,
kindergarten.
and remember, I've shared, in the weekly memos going over the course of the last 6 weeks, there was the piece of the elementary redistricting committee, that met in 1997 and into 1998, which then ultimately led to the opening of Rose as the third middle school. So one of the topics in each of those options that went through was full-day kindergarten. Like that was part of the board work and the board discussion that occurred 20 years ago, within the district. The options are not a whole lot different today, than they were there. There was not the space in the schools to do it then. There's not the space to do it the way we are currently organized to do it now. And there are real implications, to go through.
Mrs. Matlack?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for all the work and especially the research that the two of you did going to the different districts to provide us with that kind of background. And then I like to say that, those of you who know me know that I've been a proponent of full-day kindergarten for quite a while. Early childhood education is my background. I feel strongly about that. I would love to see an expansion of our preschool program as well, but, one step at a time. And I think this is a good start. So I will take the plunge, Dr. Malash, and tell you that, I am in favor of going forward with a full-day kindergarten program with the, and depending on the will of the board, if that's everybody's desire, then we can take that next step. How are we going to do that? How are we going to implement it? Okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Matlack? Dr. Dickinson?
I agree with Mrs. Matlack, and I was almost going to say the identical thing.
Probably much better than I did, though, but thank you.
I'm in complete support of it. I remember when Philadelphia had the pre-K implementation, and all the data shows, all the evidence shows that the longer students are in formal school, the better the outcomes are. So I'm fully in support of it. However, I want it to be made abundantly clear with the caveat that this is just like stage one. If we agree as a board to move forward with this, we're not approving it. We want to see the rest of the information to decide what the cost associated with it. I don't just mean dollar cost. I mean the cost in the community and potential redistricting and all that. We can move forward, but we need to see all that before, and we want to make it clear up front to everybody that as we're discussing it today, that we're not approving anything, but we will allow it to move forward, but we want to see the rest of the information before we make a final decision.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Goodwin?
And I guess along with that, I definitely think it's would be a benefit to have full-day kindergarten. And I know that you've already stated that there's no place for it. I mean, in terms of the space, there's no space to make that happen. But I guess I just wanted to, hopefully you guys can take another look and see, because I guess I don't know all the ins and outs, but I do know like there's a number of programs and things that happen in the afternoons. I just don't know if they were set up like even with the EDCC and the overflow and all those kind of things. I'm even like the hybrid approach where you have the kids in their home school if possible, and if not possible, then maybe a different school until they go to the next grade. So I don't know if all those things have been looked at, because I know if just to have it as an option, just kind of looking at all the different nuances, so that we are not coming with just one thing, or we have to do it like this and everyone has to do it that way, but have multiple options of how we can approach it from a space standpoint.
Mrs. Seidel? Thank you, Mr. Goodwin.
Dr. Malash, you mentioned that of the 12 elementary schools, that some of them and I'm not asking for a specific school's name, but how many of the 12 could house today kindergarten in-house?
Were we at maybe 6? I'm looking at, yeah, I think maybe 5 or 6 we were at, so about half.
Okay. I guess for me, I am in. I think full day kindergarten is a great idea, and it's valuable, and the research says that it's a great idea. And when my kids were that age, I wish, as a working mom, that we had full day kindergarten in the district. I utilized, like Mr. Goodwin, the EDCC program, and it was great for my kids. But to Ken's point, I also I want more info. I want to see my options if we say we're interested. Like, how many different scenarios are we talking about? And I know that we won't have details of those scenarios, but at least how many different variations. You know, in my mind, there's, okay, the hybrid, like you mentioned in Washington Township, right? Some are stay in the school, some don't. There's somebody in the community had mentioned, you know, bringing in a trailer space or container space or something, you know, to that effect for schools that don't have it. Like, is that a reality? Is that a real viable option? I kind of want to understand how many different options we have to choose from. But I definitely see the value in the program and in moving forward with it. I just feel like I want to know what that second step, how daunting it is, basically. How hard is it going to be to narrow down that decision? From an administrative perspective, do you think there's only 3 viable options, 2 viable options? Do you know, just some sort of, I don't know. I can't find the right word for it, but Ken, I know you know where I'm going with this. I just feel like I need a little more.
Right, and I think I understand, Ms. Seidel, and as you talked about, and as Mr. Townsend talked about, you know, just, and even Dr. Dickinson, to go through, like, what are the, if we had a menu to choose from, what does that look like?
Scarpolino?
Yes, I definitely think full day kindergarten is something that we should pursue, so I am on board on that. But to, you know, sort of piggyback on Mrs. Seidel and Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Tomlinson have said, I'd like to know our options and the pros and cons of each of those options, and which ones, you know, which of the ones do you recommend, don't recommend. And I'd also like to know if there's any research out there on whether is it better for the kids to stay in their home school and interact with the older students, or is it better, like that video we saw of that Japanese kindergarten center, is that better, or is there no research? Or I would like just a little bit more information about that aspect, not just sort of the nuts and bolts aspect, but what ultimately is probably best for the students.
I would argue that most early childhood educators would say that they would want a K center. There are benefits to having students involved in a K-5 setting, but in regards to an early childhood perspective, I think most researchers are going to say that they want to have something that is contained, meaning all students of one grade level in an environment that allows for social interaction, that's very print rich, that allows for creative and imaginative play, but that is also academically rigorous but developmentally appropriate. So I can look for that. I don't know if there is, because I've looked at a lot of research, if there's anything specific to the pros and cons of a K center or having students housed in the current building. The research really speaks to the structure of the environment in which the students should be in, and most of the research that you see really speaks to large K centers. But again, there's also research that speaks to the concepts or aspects that you should see in a K classroom and opportunities for engagement with other kindergarten students. So, but I can look.
Thank you.
So, of all of the districts in the surrounding areas, are there any districts that have K centers?
Washington Township has the K Center, and
And you did go visit there?
That was the
Or-
only one that I saw that had a true K center. No, Gloucester just has the pre-K, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm also in favor. I'm not going to repeat what everybody said, but I'm also, this has been one of my campaign items of declaring that I would like to see full-day kindergarten. But my other suggestion is, when you do research on this, is if 5 or 6 buildings have the room and we bus, was just thinking here, if we bus students to those other, is there busing available to do that? There might not even might not even be able to offer that because of the busing shortage that there is today in the whole state. So I'll just throw it out there that I'm also in support of continuing this project. Thank you.
So just for my purposes, the format, I know some of you mentioned the format. Is this okay in terms of listing out the pros and the cons? I'm assuming it was a relatively easy read, and I should move forward in a similar format. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
And Dr. Ma'am, so we'll have additional update in August?
August?
Right.
Will that be of the whole or a committee?
So it'll go through CNI initially, then we can certainly have the discussion at the work session.
Okay. Thanks.
Do I have to stay here for the rest of my stuff?
You do.
Okay.
It fits you.
No. So, do you want me to raise theatrical production now?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we had this is a follow-up to some board questions from a previous CNI meeting, so it's perfect timing.
Okay. So there was a question in regards to the theatrical production form, the review form that we shared out. And there were just some questions in regards to the turnaround time when a school, East or West, submits the information to central office. What's the turnaround time? So typically it's about 4 or 5 days. We've already went through the process once. Each one of us receives the play and really is expected to read it in one night or two, and complete the form and get the feedback to the school as quickly as possible, because we do understand the need for them to be able to have production rights and everything that the school needs to do in order to prepare for the production. But the form really allows us to look at sensitive issues, controversial issues, equity issues. So we're looking at it through different lenses. The individuals who are reviewing the form include myself, the affirmative action officer, the building principal, 2 teachers in the building, and there are all sorts of questions on the form which speaks to a variety of topics. So the expectation is that we are all looking at it from our frame of reference in the work that we do, looking at it through the curricular impact, how the community will receive the production, et cetera. So the turnaround time is quick, and we do view it through a number of different lenses, but the turnaround, I have my notes here, and it's also an opportunity for us to engage in dialogue with the schools around the productions that they're gonna put on. So the form is a forum to start that conversation. One of the things that I kind of got in the email with questions was, if there's something that is an issue, how do you kind of keep the process going? So if there is an issue, immediately, if someone on the form says, I'm not approving this, there are questions that are posed back to the building principal, and then the building principal has to respond and say what are they going to do to either address the issue and or take that production off the table, and or go to the assistant superintendent to appeal either my decision of a no or the affirmative action officer's decision of a no. So we've gone through the process once already with It's a Wonderful Life over at East, and you saw Mr. Gambino was here to speak to that, and we actually rushed to make sure that we had that production on for the June meeting, because we do understand the importance of the schools being able to adequately prepare. So your comments were noted, and we've already kind of dealt with some of them, so that's how I'm able to speak to the form and how we address the form, how we interact with the school and with the building principal and the play producers.
Can I just add, Dr. Mahan? So this is the first time that we've employed this process, that
Right.
we initiated this spring. Remember, as a follow-up to the work that we did with ragtime and around ragtime. I expect that as we move into next year, that as we plan for 2018, 2019, that we will have dates when we want, the shows to be approved, right? So for it to come, and by approval, ultimately, the board will not take action on approving the shows. It's an information item that will come through C&I and then through discussion at the work session if need be, but ultimately I will sign off, is the final sign-off where it is. We did not put due dates in this year as we started it, but I anticipate that as we come into next spring, there'll be a due date for the spring musical, when they have to have it submitted so that it can come for C&I to discussion. For the fall play, both High School East and High School West do a fall show. High School West also does a children's show. So there's a time frame when that information have to come through, but we did not include that this spring. I anticipate you'll see that as the information is revised moving into this year.
Mr. Goodwin?
Just curious, this committee that is formed will, if one of the teachers objects to it, I mean, what's the weight? I mean, is there, like, everyone has an equal weight in terms of their opinion of the play, or is there, like, the affirmative action officer, or is there a higher weight depending on who objects to the play?
Do you wanna? I would say I think there's weight just in the way the names are listed on the form. So it starts at the building level, and unless the teachers are in agreement and really support what they're bringing forward, the principal would not be receiving it. So typically, if it's starting at the building level, someone at the building is interested in putting on that production, and then they share the paperwork with the building principal, and then it moves forward, and the ultimate decision is with Dr. Malash. But I think there are levels, but I don't know if there's weight. I think each person has to complete the form, and everyone is responsible for addressing each of the areas. So we all look at the form. We all have to complete the same form. It's just the lens that we're looking at the play content. So I look at it really from a curriculum standpoint. Is it equitable? Are there diverse characters? Is it relevant to our, to what we're teaching our student? Different things like that, as opposed to a teacher might say, this is something that we want to engage in. This is fun. It would be a great production. So everyone is kind of viewing it through a different lens.
And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong with what you were asking, but I think the form is the second step. That initial discussion at the building level has already happened, as you alluded to, right? There was already an interest and a discussion whether it was appropriate and whether it should be raised to the next level. So I think that your concern should have been vetted out before the form even gets submitted to the next level, if the process works as intended.
Correct.
Okay, I must have misunderstood. So the principal approves it, so then it comes, and who's filling out forms
So
after that?
So after that, the affirmative action officer, the director of curriculum, the assistant superintendent, and the superintendent all go through. The expectation is that we are going to read the manuscript and address any concerns based on the areas that are outlined on the form. So there are curricular aspects of the form, there are equity issues outlined in the form, there are gender issues raised on the form, so there are a number of different areas, and each of us is to go through and say there are no issues in this area, or this is something that could potentially be an issue, and if we do think that it could potentially be an issue, what are we doing to address it? So similar to what you saw with the production of Ragtime, there was an issue. Then what did we do to address the issue? What were some of the lessons that were put in place? What were some of the conversations? So really trying to be proactive instead of reactive in how we respond to controversial issues that may be raised in a theatrical production. Mrs. Judd?
So at the building level, when you say teachers, I'm assuming it would be the theater department teachers. Are there any other teachers that are looking at this?
Sometimes it depends. In previous years, we've had, not in previous years, sorry, but in when we have supplemental materials that are approved, we typically ask for, and this is on a form that's already approved, 2 teachers to look at it. So I would assume, yes, that it would be the theatrical production teachers, but they may want an English teacher to look at the work, or someone who's involved in equity work at the building to look at the work, or if there's a certain heritage or culture club where a teacher is actively involved that may impact or that might be present in that production, they may want them to look at it as well. But typically, you know, a Mr. Gambino, a Mr. Weaver would be the persons initiating the form.
And for lack of better wording, so there have been plays in the past, musicals in the past, that have really raised some eyebrows at both schools.
Yes.
Do you think that the first no is going to be at the administrative level, at the district, or at the building? Or have you guys thought that out, or are you prepared for a no if it gets to that? It might not be a fair question tonight, but it's something that I have thought.
Yes, Mr. Judge, I'll give you an answer. There's lots of shows that have been done that people have not necessarily appreciated or come to see or brought their kids to see for a variety of reasons. You know, whether it's the actual context of the show or the way that it's been staged and blocked, and you know what the costumes or lack of costumes, you know, that have been used. You know, as far as Dr. Mann has talked about a number of times, you know, the intention is to be proactive in the process and really to formalize the discussions that for a long time I'm sure have taken place, right? Have there been no's at the school level? There's been lots of no's through the years that have never gone beyond that because the discussion has taken place. You know, to say, well, I want to do hair. I love the music from Hair. We're never doing hair, right? That's just not happening. You know, to go through. So things that has occurred at the school level, you know, in the past. Listen, there's been discussions that I can say that I've participated in the past, because the reality is, you know, it's student-produced theater. It's children, you know, that are on the stage, children that are in the pits, so that are working the costumes, the staging, all that kind of thing to go through. And there's also a certain level of responsibility of, we can't, at the school level, you know, as they have the discussions, they can't put on a show that's going to lose $30,000 every year, you know, in the name of art or whatever it is, right? I mean, there's a responsible reality that goes in, you know, at the same time. There's also a responsible reality that during a child's 4 years in high school, that they have the opportunity to participate in different sorts of theatrical productions, because there's lots of different types of musical theater. There's lots of different types of plays. You know, staging Our Town with the 2 ladders on the stage, which is a really inexpensive show to do, there's a value in doing that, you know, in terms of what goes through. You know, doing Tea House of the August Moon is a great show. With Tea House of the August Moon, which has been done at both high schools during the course of the last 25 years, that would raise a lot of eyebrows right now, you know, in terms of what it is. So the discussions have taken place. I believe that there's been no's at the building level. There will continue to be no's. And in no way is it for the district or for the schools to avoid, you know, doing a show that may be controversial or that may raise questions, because I believe that it's our responsibility to do that as well. You know, but as Dr. Mahan talked about, you know, the process that played out, you know, very publicly as we discussed Ragtime, are the discussions that are taking place literally at one high school right now, you know, with a show in terms of what's going on. But it has to be there. It's a different type of reality. And it does, you know, I'm sitting as the conversation's going on, running through my head. It doesn't matter whether it's Oklahoma or Music Man or, you know, the West Side Story, you know, all the different things that have been done. There's going to be controversy, or could be controversy in any of them, you know, to go through. Whether the Wedding Singer or In the Heights or you know, Evita or in any of them, Pippin, right? I mean, right? Pippin raised a lot of questions, you know, when it was done, you know, and it's so there's no reason that we can't do shows that have questions or that have social issues or questions about social issues, you know, or but it's how do we approach it? You know, what's our responsibility? Because again, you know, this is where it came through with the discussion with Ragtime. Our responsibility as a school district is the children that are in our schools. You know, it's great that people from the community come and see the shows. It is. It's a piece of it. But our responsibility is to those kids who are on the stage or involved in the production of the show. You know, and there's ways to approach it and ways to handle it. You know, so there has to be what's the plan in doing it. You know, we talked about the production of To Kill a Mockingbird, which received rave reviews and was written up about how successful it was because it was used as a teaching tool from within the school and then within, you know, within larger scale within the community. But it was approached in a very proactive way. In terms of where it is, you know, so this first year as we've gone through the process, and there's been lots of questions, you know, from the buildings, which is good, you know, because we all make assumptions. You know, and earlier in discussion we talked about, you know, from June, you know, between June 1st of 2013 and today, you know, we've replaced or have moved 18 of the 19 building principals. You know, so there's a different level of institutional history and understanding of what's going on, you know, today than there was then. So it's, you know, formalizing the process. I believe that there's, you know, I like rules. Right? There's safety and guidelines. There's safety and structure. There's safety and organization. Not that people won't necessarily question. I'm not going to tell you that we're going to bring a show forward that people are not necessarily going to say we shouldn't be doing or question, because that's going to happen. You know, it's going to happen. You know, and we're challenged to come up with anything, whether it's, I mean, you know, there are people that protest Seussical, you know, because they don't like certain of the depictions that are in there and what does the cat represent, and, you know, it just is, you know.
And then the final item that was added, just as an informational note, on October 5th at the CNI committee meeting, we had Dr. Thomas Powers from CHOP come to present to us on a research study that he wanted to do with Cherry Hill Public Schools on organizational skills, or students who have organizational skill issues. And we found out yesterday that he was awarded the funding through the Institute of Educational Services. So, as with any research, there are a couple of tweaks that they have asked him to make, and he will be sending me an update of those very minor changes. I did speak to Lisa, and I'm asking that this item be placed on the board agenda on either July 25th or August 8th, with information shared from Dr. Powers, the changes in a Friday memo to all of you. On the October 18th board meeting, we already had board approval for him to submit, or approval for him to submit Cherry Hill's participation in the proposal. So now it's saying, yes, we're formally going to participate. The 2 schools in Cherry Hill that will be selected will be announced in terms of who will participate, and I'll be able to share that with you as soon as he has the final information from his research team. And the approval will allow Dr. Powers to work with the building principals to prepare for what they will need to do September moving forward. Okay. Is that it for CNI? Thank you.
Dr. Mahan, with her, she has the binder, some of the research, if anybody is interested in perusing any of it, to go through, at least the initial pieces.
All right, then I guess we'll move into BNF, and Mrs. Sugars, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. I'm going to change the order here because I started my day with Mr. Middleton about 12 hours ago, and Mr. Middleton is still here. I asked him to join us tonight just to update you on the East project. It's a fairly significant project, and if you've had an opportunity to see some of the work that's being done over there, it's in many locations throughout the building, most significantly in the B and C wing courtyard. And you know, it's a little daunting when you take a close look at it. But I asked Mr. Middleton to come tonight to talk about, number one, a couple of change orders that are associated with the project, and also just a status of the project. We have some decent allowances built into the project, knowing that when you start to open up walls of buildings in the age group that they are, that you can certainly find some things that you didn't anticipate. However, we have come across a few situations that will necessitate change orders.
Correct. working on 2 projects that are under one contract at High School East. This is kind of in the back of the house area. It's behind the DeBart Gym. We're doing the second phase of a foundation waterproofing project. So this has been excavated. That's temporary piping that you see in there to pipe a rainwater conductor that goes through this excavation, so we don't have a swimming pool out there, although East always did want a swimming pool. So far we've avoided the swimming pool. We'll be putting waterproofing on the foundation wall and repiping the storm drainage system and then backfilling that. So this is a relatively small portion of the project.
John, how deep is that?
At this end, it's about 6 feet. At the other end, it probably goes to 8 feet. So.
And the bottom, John, where you can see the dirt, right? Like that was.
That actually, the dirt that you see on, yes, that's correct, Joe.
On the wall, that's
right. And what you see down at the bottom of that black spot is the actual building foundation. That's concrete that you see down there. So we'll be waterproofing the entire perimeter across to where the gas service goes into the building. So that's a view of those 2 things. Yes. So also with that project, we are doing some repairs inside the building to damaged stormwater piping that comes off of the roof. So we have the building floor inside cut up as well. Don't have any fantastic pictures of that to show you, but that's the other portion of this part of the work. Now this part, that you see on the right is actually B-wing. So we've stripped the brick off of that, so you're looking into the skeleton of the building. You see the green stuff is structural steel supporting the floors and the roof. The gray stuff is concrete masonry units that is in very poor condition. That's part of why the wall failure.
Is the steel?
Yes. So that we didn't have to go into the building, we're kind of designing the building with an exoskeleton. So normally, the gray part that Joe just pointed to is the structural part of the building. But since that's in poor condition, we're actually putting new brick on the wall that's going to be reinforced, and that's a structural element that's going to be tied back into the skeleton of the building. So we're kind of building a shell on the outside of the building. So let me go through these pictures, and then I'll explain to you a little bit more about what, and for some reason this does not want to slide for me. Here we go. This is looking towards Crescent Road. This is the link between B and C wing. It's the courtyard side of that link. The other side of the link is going to be done essentially the same way. They've got the brick stripped off of that completely now. This is the shot of the South Link, which is, for you folks who know High School East, it's opposite the lecture halls between B and C wing. This is the rear of the North Link. Strangely, this pink spot that you see next to the door is where a univentilator pushed through the wall. So essentially, between the inside of the building and the outside of the building, there was the brick, and that was it. So it's kind of strange construction. So just another shot of the overall condition in the courtyard. So it's kind of encapsulated right now, and you know, that's when the contractor needs to work on the area, he's opening up those tarped areas so that he can work. And usually there's tarps. This area that you see right now has tarps over it now. So I just caught them at a time where they didn't have the tarps. So the project consists of all the windows that you see in these areas where we stripped off the masonry are going to be replaced with brand new windows. Part of the nice way about the way this was handled is we don't have to get into the inside of the building too much. For example, the classrooms in B wing, 2 floors of classrooms, I think there's 10 classrooms, a couple of science labs. We're not going into the classroom except right at the window. So we're pulling the windows out, putting new windows in, and it'll get a new windowsill. But the wall stays intact throughout the course of this project. That link, which is the south link, again, we have to go into the building a little bit to repair the masonry wall, but for the most part, the wall is staying intact, and we're working on the outside of the building. The other link, however, the front link at this link, which is the front one near the library, those walls are going to come out completely. So you're going to see big holes in the wall. The only thing that's going to be left is the roof, the floor, and the slabs. And that'll be all filled in with new metal panel systems. So it'll be finished inside and outside of the building through the course of the project. So that's getting opened up some big window areas across the first floor corridor so that the students will be able to see out into the courtyard as they pass from class to class. So as Lynn said, there's a number of change orders that are in the works. We've hit asbestos that was unidentified at a couple of places. One of those has already been remediated. It was glue dots that glued bulletin boards to the wall, so it was no big deal. We hit some vinyl asbestos tile, so that's going to have to be removed. We haven't done that yet. We have allowances in the project to repair some of this masonry that's staying. So we have a pretty healthy allowance. It's about $36,000 to repair masonry that we could not quantify because we couldn't see into the wall to see what the condition of it was. There's a couple other change orders pending for some steel modifications. So there's a number of things in the works. And Lynn, I don't know if you want me to go through the list, I can go through the list, but generally it's to pick up conditions that are unforeseen through the course of the project. So we're addressing them as we go. There have been some structural modifications that we've had to make. But you know, generally it's you know, a lot of little pieces as we've hit so far. The other link, the one at the other end of the courtyard, there's actually the lintels, which are the support over top of the windows and doors. They were concealed. When we exposed them, they're in bad condition. So we're going to have to get into a correction of that portion of the work. So that's going to drag us into the inside of the building to fix those particular areas. But for the most part, like I said, we're not going too deeply into the building to make the repairs. Any questions? Kathy?
So are you reusing the brick, or did that you're
No,
not able to reuse
that's
the
all
brick?
going in the dumpster, and the new brick is close to being in transit, as are most of the materials for the project. The windows, the brick, the curtain wall, which are the big expanses of glass. The glass, as a matter of fact. So that's all being procured and getting ready to ship.
And will this be ready by the first day of school?
Game plan is yes.
Wow,
so,
good.
But it's going to take a lot of cooperation from the contractor to.
And the
get
weather,
up
I
on
would
plan
suspect.
this
Yeah,
done, right.
yeah.
Yeah, there's, you know, not to pull any punches on this, but there's windows that were supposed to be available during this construction window. He advised us this morning the windows are not going to be in until the end of September. That's not the end of the world. They'll block up the openings, classes and circulation can proceed, and then when the windows come in, they'll backfeed them into the building. Any other questions?
A couple of weeks ago, Lynn and I were over there, and Lynn, you know, escorted me through the we went through the classroom by the greenhouse and walked outside. It was fascinating, right, to see what was done and see what the construction looked like and what the guys are doing now and the work that's there. It's hard to, and John, I'm grateful for you sharing the pictures and you guys going through and doing that. It's hard even to fathom what it looks like standing in there to look up in that courtyard of what it actually is, you know, and then having been in the courtyard before and seeing it finished, but to see what it's all stripped down, you know, just the naked building. It's an internal courtyard.
Drive into.
It's an internal courtyard.
Are there any questions before Mr. Middleton leaves? Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Have a good night.
I just wanted to say thank you for telling me what a lintel is. I've been hearing it, and I just have been embarrassed to ask that I.
We have a couple other things on our agenda tonight that I wanted to talk about. The first item we have is the processing of special education contracts. This is probably something that you noticed at our last agenda. We had quite a few contracts that we were approving from the 16-17 school year. Obviously, we have to approve new ones going into the new budget year, but we had quite a few that we were approving riders on. And the reason we were approving riders on them is because when those contracts were originally approved, they were approved in a not-to-exceed capacity. So, you know, the contract was for $150,000. We find that we have spent $175,000. So we had to go through that process because of how they were originally approved. And having some conversations when I first got here, and believe it or not, I've been here a year already, which doesn't seem possible. Thank you. So one of the things that I noticed right away was the difficulty with that process. You know, I talked to Mrs. Weathington and to the business office, and I think, you know, when you're talking about special ed contracts, when we are providing services to children, I believe the intent of the not-to-exceed contracts was to monitor our spending on those contracts. But the bottom line is we don't go out and say, I'm sorry, but you can't provide that service to that child today. And so then we found that the process was getting bogged down because then we had a legal process, you know, we had to reach out to Mr. Andrews. He had to process the riders for us. We had to board approve them. And we felt that it was really not serving its intended purpose. So I talked to actually the B&F committee a couple of months ago about changing that process. We feel that monitoring that process is better served through the purchase order process. So being realistic about what the needs are when we budget, and then encumbering funds so that, you know, I would rather encumber $200,000 and spend $175,000 than encumber $150,000 and have to come up with another $25,000. So we had met back in the winter, and I think I had shared this with you. We had developed kind of a checklist of what we needed in terms of the level of the contract and whether the contract was for someone with a professional license or not a professional license, because they're treated two different ways. And then we had sort of developed this little flow chart so that, you know, everybody understood how we were going to go forward with processing those contracts. Mrs. Ridgway is meeting on a monthly basis with the special ed department to monitor that as well, so that we have a feel for what our needs are, where those contracts are going, and then we will adjust through the purchase order process as opposed to going through the rider process. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. We should not have those issues next June because we won't be processing those contracts the way we did last year. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Again, travel approvals. This was something that we approved last month. Thank you for doing that. And as you know, that the resolution that we passed applies to in-state professional development for which the fees are $150 or less. So you're not talking about your larger trips where, you know, someone is going out of state and there's airfare and all those things. This is really just for if it's in-state and the registration fee is $150 or less, it will now go through an administrative approval process. It doesn't necessarily have to go in front of the board. Our policy permits us to do that. We just had not enacted that resolution, which we did last month. We are also going to start doing per diem reimbursements as opposed to receipt reimbursements. And the reason that we have decided to do this, or we're going to try it and see how it works, is because we have run into a couple situations this past year where the per diem that the GSA would allow for the cost of the hotel did not cover the cost of the hotel. So if we allow to reimburse on a per diem basis, which means on that same GSA chart, there's reimbursement amounts for meals and incidental expenses as well, then the person who is taking the trip can apply those funds as they see fit. So right now, if, I'll give you an example. We had an administrator go to a conference very recently. The conference was held at a college. Well, there's no site hotel at a college. If they stay at the site hotel, you know, we can pay for the full amount. If they don't, we have to use the per diem amount. There's no site hotel at a college, so that person actually had some significant out-of-pocket expenses to attend that conference. If we use the per diem amount, whereas we give them, you know, the GSA rate for the hotel and the GSA rate for the meals, then they can take those funds and apply them as they see fit. Maybe, you know, have dinner at Panera's that night or something like that, and then they can apply those funds as they see fit. So that's something else. The business office is actually meeting this week to discuss that, to talk to how we're going to process that. We would also like to encumber funds earlier. Right now, we go through the approval process and then we encumber the funds. We're going to change that process a little bit, so that will aid with that. Will also help the employee who now doesn't have to keep track of all their receipts when they get them. It's also the recommended way to handle reimbursements when we do federal grant spending. So I think it will simplify the process and help us expedite that process as well. Is there any questions?
So I was under the impression that that $150 so just to clarify, so when you say in-state, so someone going to Delaware or someone going to Philadelphia, this would not
Correct.
apply?
So this would be, you know, there's a seminar in Vineland today, and it's $129 to attend. The person could go through the administrative approval process without having to go on an agenda. And one of the good things about that is it changes your timelines. Like right now, people have to really plan far in advance because everything has to go on an agenda. This will allow them to have a little more flexibility with that.
I guess my point was more along the lines of, so if there's a $50 conference in Philly, you still have to go through this process.
You do, because the law specifically says in-state professional development.
Okay.
Any questions about that? Okay. So our third item is a policy update. This is a policy that the district currently does not have. It's policy 8550, and it applies to unpaid meal charges. And literally, Strauss Esme, who is our policy provider, had provided an update on this policy not too long ago, where basically it was an optional policy. And then suddenly, the United States Department of Agriculture came back and said this is a mandated policy and every district has to have it. So we had to take a look at what our practices were. Our current practice was to provide an alternate meal to our middle school and elementary school children if in fact they did not have funds to purchase lunch that day. So a sandwich, you know, kind of a basic lunch, so that they would get food for the day, but you know, not the typical, couldn't buy a la carte items, couldn't buy maybe a special drink or things like that. At our high schools, we had a no charging policy, which basically meant that if you didn't have funds with you, you didn't get a meal that day. When I read this policy, that's a practice you can keep in place. However, for every child that does not have funds for the day, you have to make a phone call home. So in speaking with the high school principals, thinking about trying to manage that with the number of students that we have at the high schools, every time a child would come through the line and not have funds, having to pull them aside, sending them to the office, having the office staff make that. We just decided that that was going to be very difficult to manage. And so we modified our policy. I shared it with all of the principals to take a look at it. And, you know, so basically what we're putting in place, which is pretty much the recommended policy from the Department of Agriculture, is to allow for the student to still get a basic lunch, but to implement a program to notify the parents. One thing we discovered as we were investigating this is that our current practice is to Aramark, sorry, wrong district. Aramark currently provides notice, and it's a letter that gets printed out and sent home with the child in their backpack. You know, at the elementary and middle school levels. I can't imagine that many parents have seen those letters, first of all, and as we did some more digging, Mrs. Ridgway and I discovered that there are some significant outstanding balances that have not been paid and never kind of really followed up on. So, you know, developing this policy has given us an opportunity to take a look at that and develop new procedures for that. So now the business office, as opposed to Aramark, is going to handle that process. We will provide, you know, second notice, first notice, second notice, those kinds of things. Eventually we can, although I don't know that we'll do it, but eventually we can not serve a child if we've made many attempts to collect and haven't. But, you know, this will provide for levels of notification, letting the parents know in a more efficient manner that there is an outstanding balance. I think at this point, you know, spoken to Dr. Malash about this, I don't see how we can go back, you know, because I don't think these parents have been given sufficient notification. And when I say there are some kids I think who've been eating free for a couple of years that, you know, either the parents didn't know or whatever happened. I don't feel it's appropriate for us to go back and ask parents to pay those significant balances. But, you know, starting here on out, we will start to monitor that better and make sure that, you know, that gets taken care of.
So you set up your account online and you have a credit card or whatever, and you can put $50, or I think the max was $100 or $125. How did some of these children never, like, if maybe I set the parameter of let me know when they get down to $10 or $7.50 or whatever it was, and I would get alerts.
Yeah,
through email.
I think this is primarily children whose parents have not set up accounts, who are coming through the line and, you know, just don't have funds for the day or didn't bring funds, or as I said, maybe the parents didn't even understand the process.
Okay.
But these are just basically children who maybe don't have accounts set up or just showing up every day and getting lunch.
And Mrs. Judge, just, you know, remember when the child comes through the line, so the kids use their ID numbers to punch in, their picture comes up on the screen, and if there's no money in the account and the kid doesn't have money, the picture still comes up and it gets charged, the meal gets charged in there, and just goes into the red. You know, so that red becomes a very deep pool.
Now the
in
child
some ways.
can't, like I said, buy a special drink or buy cookies or buy anything. We'll give them, you know, the basic lunch, but they have been, you know, printing out a letter and taking it home in their backpack that the parent may or may not have been seeing.
So, for, I guess, moving forward, if that comes up, are the parents also given information related to free lunch?
Yes,
and that?
absolutely.
Okay.
We always do that, particularly if we see something that's chronic. You know, we will send them information on this is how you apply for free lunch. You know, we can help them through that process.
Why wouldn't Aramark pick up on that? Because, you know, they're guaranteeing that profit with us, and they're looking at their costs, and you would think that that would come up, maybe not even, or why didn't that come up in the audit if we're talking about significant dollars?
You know, that's a good question. Whether they were just booking it as a receivable and carrying it on their books and still making the profit without pursuing that, you know, I don't know the answer to that. you know, I don't know. Those are things that, you know, we'll find out as we move into this new process.
So in total, approximately, how much money are we talking about?
I want to say $15,000 to $20,000. So I think having the business office kind of monitor that and take over that process will help with that.
So in the past, Aramark was just absorbing that, and we didn't know that there were kids who were maybe going months or years without money to pay. Like, they weren't reporting that to us, because now, you know, in this new policy, there's a requirement to contact, social services if we think there's an issue as to why.
Absolutely.
So Aramark was absorbing those costs, but we weren't necessarily knowing that there might be an issue with some of these children. So now that we'll have it in district, we'll be able to monitor that a lot better.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And as you said, with the policy, have a requirement to follow through. Any other questions about that? Okay. Okay, and then following up on that, as we talk about meals a little bit, I had sent home a sample letter of letters that we often receive from our private schools for the disabled. This district has not traditionally processed those or approved those. I would like to start adding those to the agendas. Spoke to both Dr. Malash and Mr. Green about it. Basically, our PSDs have the option to provide meals and not go through the process of collecting funds from parents, having them go through the free and reduced lunch application process. It means that we pay a slightly higher tuition. However, when you think about, you know, the population that they're serving, the issues that they're dealing with, what parents could be dealing with, obviously, with those students, I think it's a small price to pay to not put them through that process and worry about that. So you will start to see these letters. I have 3 here already, one from Archway, one from Hampton, and one from Yale. So you will start to see those periodically on agendas as we go through the school year. Questions about that? One final thing that was not on our agenda, I am very disappointed to report that we had the athletic bid opening today. This was our second round. As you know, we awarded bids in June. We were very anxious to get that out as early as possible to try to avoid some of the transportation issues that we had last year. And we had awarded all of East and some of the middle school and about 3/4 of West, none at Beck. So we decided that we would put it back out again, kind of see what happened. We were hoping that some of the bus companies who may have been bidding on other routes would kind of know where they stood and would take an interest in this rebid. We had no bidders. So we are going to meet and evaluate and decide what our next steps are in terms of can we change times? We had changed some of the times. You know, what is the issue? Why were there's no response for Beck? So we're going to take a look at some of that. We're going to work with Mr. Barrow and try to come up with some solutions for that in dealing with that as we go forward. We still have, so we had done the fall season for the middle schools. We still have the winter and the spring. They did not have their schedules when we went out originally, and they should have their schedules soon for winter, so we will go out again for those. And East added a couple of events. They did not have a final swimming schedule when we went out, so we will add that as well. But we will regroup and see what we can do to try to fill some more of those.
Do we ask the companies why they're not bidding on Beck in particular?
Yeah, we got a little bit of feedback, which I thought was interesting. We had spoken to one bus company who I actually thought their response was odd, that they were more willing to bid on the schools that they had worked with in the past. They had not worked with Beck in the past, and so they weren't willing to put a bid in on that, which was odd to me. I think consensus is that it's more difficult to get to West during the day at that time frame when they need the busing than it is to get to East, whether that's the proximity of the bus companies or what have you. And so that seems to be a factor. You know, we'll get some more feedback. We'll talk to them a little bit more and see, you know, if we can get some idea. I know that for the most part, the middle schools were able to kind of on a weekly basis fill in the gaps. My main concern right now is West because I know they had a very difficult time last year. So we'll have some discussions about that and see what we can do.
So again, as we get closer to the school year and if we still have these transportation problems, is this something where we're going to sort of notify parents up front about the process, then the problems we're having, so that we don't get the kind of misinformation that the community thinks, you know, why is East get everything and West isn't getting any buses, or that sort of thing, to explain we've sent the bids out, bids were not returned.
Right.
So, and again, there's that sense that I paid my activity fee, why am I not getting a bus? Maybe we can get in front of that this fall.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question unrelated to transportation regarding the signed budget by the governor and additional funds to school districts. Do we have, is that a fact?
That's a really good question, Kathy.
Yeah.
You know, we have not received anything official yet,
Okay.
if that's the question.
That's the question.
We have not received anything official yet, and
Okay.
we are anxiously awaiting that.
No other school district has.
Not that we're aware of.
Really? Okay. All right. Thank you.
I did meet with Senator Beach this morning and discussed it, and one of the questions I asked him, he said the money's going to be there. Where's the money? The budget, right? I told Lisa and Linda earlier today, I'm looking for a big check. Like, I want a big check with that extra money written on there. But yeah, we keep being told that it's there. We've gotten nothing from the department, from anybody.
I suppose we're skipping HR.
We are no items at this time, according to Ms. Adrian, for discussion in public session.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll turn it over to Dr. Malash.
Thank you. Dr. Campisi sends his regards. Unfortunately, he had a family situation, so he was unable to be with us this evening, but wanted to be remembered to all of you. So I told him I would certainly pass that along. So I have a couple of things to talk about that Dr. Campisi has shared. The first one, and I'm going to go out of order too, because it just brings me back to memories of the CNI meetings of, you know, just because we have it listed by numbers, we didn't follow them. So the advertising sports schedules with Valpak. So I shared information in the weekly memo. So Valpak is a mailing that goes out. So they would like to publish our fall sports schedules for the high schools. There's no fee that's associated with doing it, but they do use the district logo and the school's logos, you know, the mascots and that kind of thing. It's, you know, I find it to be a great way to get that information out there about when the athletic events are. There's no cost to us. There's no other piece that goes through. There are other districts that do it as well, you know, that share that information. But I just wanted you to be aware of what it is. There is board policy that allows us to give the approval to do that. So it's just as an informational piece. Sure.
Doesn't the Cherry Hill Sun publish our schedules as well?
The Cherry Hill Sun does publish our schedules, and Cherry Hill Sun actually publishes a lot of great information about the district. One of the challenges with the Sun is it's only distributed in a limited area in Cherry Hill, although it's accessible to everyone online. For which we are appreciative. But yes, correct.
So this would be an addition.
Would be an
to it.
addition, correct. All right. And then the other piece is about an update on the activity participation fee research. So earlier this spring, we have board policy that governs activity participation fees. It's policy number 2436. So part of the policy is that it's to be reviewed each year. So during the discussion, Mrs. Scarpolino and the committee asked Dr. Campisi to do some research on what other districts charge. So I have a handout that I want to give out to everyone and then have a little discussion about where we are. So Dr. Campisi went through and did research throughout the state, and he put this chart together. So I do need to explain a little bit about what the chart is. So there's a lot of information that's on this sheet, right? So some of you have seen some of this information before, because as you look, the first 8 columns were regarding funding, right? And the fair funding, and who's overfunded, who's underfunded, and that kind of stuff. So it just kind of, he just put it together, so it built on that. The last 3 columns are specific or germane to the topic of the discussion. It's about participation fee information. It is a double-sided sheet. It's the same information on both sides of the sheet. It's just sorted in a different manner. So on the front side, it is sorted. It's sorted by underfunding. Yes, right. Yes, and then on the back side, it is sorted by the back. Yeah, so the one that starts at -80 is sorted by underfunding, and the one that starts at -23 is sorted by per child cost to go through. So just take a minute to take a look. You can see Cherry Hill is highlighted in pink in both ones. There are 2 costs. There's an $80 cost for a high school child, a $70 cost for a middle school child in Cherry Hill, with a family cap of $150. So the 200 slash, so the question is for Haddonfield, there's a cap, family cap, $200/125, $200 for high school and $125 for middle school. They're the only ones that differentiated between that for the family cap. We also went through and looked at some of the policies that govern, so again, I have information, Cherry Hill, Kingsway, Haddonfield, Eastern Regional, Collingswood, Evesham Township, and Lenape District. The majority of them are, they follow the Strauss-Esme model, which is what, our policy and the procedure is a little bit more detailed that we send out for the actual practice, but it's the same. It uses the same basic language. In order to continue to support the broad range of educational experiences, the Board of Education has determined that a fee must be implemented for students in grades 6 through 12. And similar language is used throughout. I was telling Mr. Green that we were looking at one of them, and one of the districts refers to that in an effort to maintain, quote, in an effort to maintain the school district mission of unlimited educational experiences, which I thought was a fascinating word to include in their unlimited educational experiences. I think that'll come back after, right? Yes. Yes.
For Kingsway, it says $195 at the high school level per child, but there's no cap. Would
Correct.
that be, like, if they were in fall, winter, spring sport, would it be $195?
Yeah, so good question, Kathy. So what it looks at for a family cap is, so it's a $195 fee for the year, so unlimited activities for that child. But if you've got 4 kids that are in school at the same time, that you're paying $195 for all 4 of those children. So as opposed to, in Cherry Hill, we have a family cap of $150. So if there was somebody that had, 3 kids in high school and a child in the middle school and they all participated in sports, they're paying $150, as opposed to more than $300. None of the ones that he came up with the examples were per activity fee. And when a lot of them initially came out, there were some districts that did that. There are very few that he came across that even have that anymore for per activity fee. That's all yearly. Other questions? Carol?
So what's the committee's recommendation after reviewing the activity fee and comparing it? What's the recommendation going forward for us?
So the recommendation for 2017-2018 academic year was not to make any changes, but to go through and do the research and find out what other folks are doing and continue the discussion about, do we want to make a change for 2018-2019? So the recommendation was not to do anything for 17-18. So the letters were actually mailed out. The information was mailed out to rising 6th graders through 12th graders at the end of June, I believe is when it went out to all the homes about the activity fee.
If I remember correctly, the reason we didn't want to recommend anything for this year is because the timing was too short, and we felt that the stakeholders, the parents would not have had notice to maybe want to have come to the board meetings and learn about it or something like that. So that's why we thought better to just see what others are doing and then make a recommendation for the following year to give plenty of time for people to have input on it.
So, so the recommendation is going to be for the 18-19 school year?
So that'll be the next piece. Like that'll be the continue the discussion. If the committee wants to continue the discussion at the next committee meeting, we can certainly do that. And say, because again, the options are to make a recommendation, change the policy, keep it as it is, decrease the amount or increase the amount.
Okay.
But at this point, I'll wait to see what the members of the committee.
So are there going to be any considerations in terms of other things that's going on in that school year and other things where?
I would anticipate that would be part of the discussion.
Okay.
People's perspective on where it is.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no administrative recommendation to make any change at this time.
Even though we're not making any, or you're not making any recommendations for this coming school year, can we share this data with our community? I think it's important to see where we fall in the surrounding area, because there's been some discussion this past year about the activity fee and the value of it and what it represents, and it's a lot of money, yes, but in comparison here, this is really eye-opening, and I think that our community should see this, or at least there's a lot of information on here, but I think it's important to see where we fall among these other districts and the amount of money that we're collecting versus what other districts are collecting. And combining that with the description of what that activity fee covers, I think would go a long way to eliminate some of the alternate facts that are out there about the activity fee.
Yes. We'll put something together before the next committee meeting about what that looks like and how to display it. Again, I'm always cautious with, putting out there, because if we're going to put ourselves out and say, we do this and look how good we look compared to these other districts, we're also going to be compared, and that's, there's going to be a double edge to both of those in terms of what goes on. And just a reminder, the activity fee, when it was implemented initially, was put in, none of those funds go directly to pay for a coach or a uniform or a bus. It literally was a measure of additional fees collected. It's additional revenue source that goes into the general fund to go through. So there's no direct connection between the collection of the activity fee and a bus being put on the road. And we go through, and it's explained in the letter that gets mailed out to parents of all children going into grades 6 through 12. So we can certainly advertise that again in different ways, but that actually is a direct mail that goes out to everybody.
Sorry, one last question. You just made me think of it. Do you know how any of these other districts apply that money? Do many of them put it in a general fund, or do some of them allocate it directly to things like coaches and buses and specific athletics?
So the majority of the policies that we go through, as we looked at it, this is the language, is each individual fee will be determined considering the district's cost for operating the activity to include, and then it goes through all the different pieces that are there, but the majority of them just go into the general fund as far as what we've been able to find. Lynn?
It's the expenses associated with that program are part of the general fund budget, and so the revenue would be as well. It would be difficult to kind of isolate that and keep it separate from everything else. So generally speaking, districts are just going to put that in as a miscellaneous revenue and make it part of their budget. I do know that, having done some research with this in my previous district, that, there was sometimes districts felt like they couldn't cut programs because of this. And once you institute the fee, they felt that they had to maintain what they had.
Miss Adrian, Nancy, do you just in round numbers, stipends? Right, so we spend about $2 million on stipends, right? So the children from whom, the families from whom we're collecting activity fees are for kids who participate in activities there's a stipend associated with. So we pay about $2 million in stipends. That $2 million does not include uniforms or choir robes or music or transportation or any of those pieces. And Lynn, we anticipate 220 in round numbers. What do we budget the least union? Yeah, between $200,000 and $220,000 is the anticipated revenue. Correct. Right. Again, just looking at the stipends, it's probably about less than 10% of what we pay in stipends. If we were to look at the overall cost of all of these activities that go through, right?
So some of these I have the answer already, but there's a middle school fee but not a high school fee. Like Berlin doesn't have a high school, correct? But
Berlin does not have a high school. They go to Eastern Regional.
Westfield does. The Westfield that I know does, but they don't have a high school? That's kind of weird.
Good question. I would have to ask
Okay.
Dr. Campisi. There's 2 Westfields, one in Union County, and I will find out.
Okay.
Will you write that
There's
down?
2
Dr.
Westfields? Oh, my God, this state.
We'll find out, Kath. Any other questions on that? All right, that's it for P&L.
All right, last but not least, strategic planning. And I guess that's you as well, Dr. Malash.
Paul just looked up and said Westfield does have a high school. Yeah, I'll find out. I'll find out as to why or why not. It's the same on both sides? Yep, it is the same on both sides. We'll find out. So, strategic planning, board goals. So I'm going to pass this around. Thank you to everyone that submitted feedback and perspective and on board goals. This is the most recent draft. So as we've talked about maintaining the overall statements or the first statements for goals 1, 2, and 3. Number 1, continue to improve student achievement at all grade levels for all students and decrease achievement gaps where they exist. Number 2 being create a cost-effective budget that provides for educational resources as well as preventative maintenance and ongoing facilities improvement in all schools. Number 3, to enhance communication relationships with internal and external stakeholders. And then number 4, which is the transition from the goal that was developed last year, is to create an actionable plan, Cherry Hill Public Schools 2020, a clear vision for the future to encompass items to be included in a referendum. You found it. Good job, Paul Green. So this is, again, updated draft. This is what went out to you on Thursday in the weekly memo. So thoughts, perspective, discussion, and as you start to think about it, Dr. Mahan asked me to update you on, I said that during the C&I discussion, Mrs. Seidel, the August C&I meeting is on July 31st, which at this point almost is an unreasonable amount of time for her to provide the additional information. So she'll do an additional information on the kindergarten at the September meeting, which will occur after Labor Day. I believe it's on that Tuesday, right? Dr. Dickinson?
So I'll start things off. And I think we had this conversation every year where there's really no evidence in here to determine whether we actually meet these goals or not. There are no objective statements that say we're going to go from A to B, and this is the data we need to determine if we got from A to B. There's a lot of, as Ken mentioned earlier, a lot of words like analyze, articulate, monitor, review. It's not really measuring anything, and we don't know whether we met the goal or not because we don't know what the standard is.
Dr. Dickinson, so are you looking specifically at the student achievement one or across the board?
I guess across the board, and I know that we don't want to get muddied down in details and numbers, but create a cost-effective budget that provides resources for preventive maintenance and ongoing facilities. We do a budget, we allocate the funds across different budget lines, but how do we know that that's actually directly impacting educational success?
Right.
Or preventive maintenance? There's no delineation, no benchmark for success.
Right.
And I don't know if it's possible to create that or establish it, but that's always problematic for me when I'm trying to evaluate whether we meet our goals or not. I take that back up. Number 4 is clear. We either create the actionable plan or we don't.
Identify the project. Right. One of the challenges, and I think this becomes one of the overall challenges in the task that's placed on the board in terms of creating goals, right? So what's the definition? How do we define success in each of these different areas? How do we quantify in a way, in a set of goals to say that this is what the board, because in the 4 areas it's done is certainly not all the work that's being done within the school district. It can't comprehensively necessarily include everything that's there, and then how do you go from what is tangible, to say, so one of the things with building a budget is, build a balanced budget that's approved. That's in its first piece, or graduate kids from high school that are appropriately prepared. So we have a phenomenal graduation rate. It becomes that. What does it look like? It's even the discussion we talk about kindergarten. What does the research say? The research talks a lot about what occurs, but there's very little at times that becomes that cause effect. Building a plan that identifies referendum items, that's clear. Now, and not to muddy the waters any further, but we could be successful by identifying 3 capital projects, that are included in there, or we could identify 1,000 capital projects, that'll be included. It becomes that hard piece, for where it is. The goals provide an opportunity for you as a board to focus the discussions that we have through committee meetings, to focus the tangible piece of the work in terms of the interaction that goes on between the board members, the administrative liaisons, who are there in terms of focus, ideas of specific focus, a specific topic, to promote discussion, and promote opportunity for you as board members, to have a better understanding of what goes on in snapshots and in pieces of the district. And one of the biggest challenges always that we have, especially when we measure student achievement data, as the state and as the federal government change the guidelines and as the state change the guidelines in terms of how they measure student success, and when that becomes available, right now it's impossible for us to say the kids, if we were to use a state assessment score, because that comes after July 1st. We've got the information, pieces of it are in now. It's starting to come out faster, but that's the hard piece. It's even if we used SAT scores, average SAT scores. If we measure the success of the AP program, we've just started to get. The kids got their initial reports last week or beginning of this week of AP. We'll have school. By August, we'll have a breakdown of where they were. It becomes tough, for the way that we operate July 1 to June 30. To show some of those pieces. So I think it's coming up with an operational definition in some ways, for you as a 9-member board and working with the liaisons in terms of what does it mean, but to go through. But I agree with you. In some ways, as we look at it, we have a lot that we examine. We do a lot of examination, right? We do a lot of analysis, in terms of what's there, to have something that even in the budget piece, this first statement, examine and improve internal controls, in school-age childcare, student activity funds, and food service, I think is a huge task, that Lynn and Lisa and the folks in their offices are going to do. Now remember, one of our challenges with success is when you're successful in a lot of ways, it makes that additional analysis make it even better, even more challenging, because we have pretty successful programs. Lynn talked tonight, one of the things is, as we do with the charged lunches and where we are, is there ways going to be improved? There absolutely are, in terms of what's there. Does that mean that we will go into July 1 of next year with no outstanding balance on kids who charge lunch? It's not. I mean, that's not real, in terms of what does it become. But I do appreciate what's that mean, and can we come up with better language or a way to articulate that? Carol, thank you.
Thank you. Mostly when I sent some comments in, they were concerning the first goal, the decreasing the achievement gaps where they exist. And, thank you for, taking to heart some of those suggestions. Of course, we have to analyze the data, that we get in, and that's something that's ongoing. I appreciate you putting in implementing the plans developed this year to replicate the successes for next year. And then the same thing in the next one, implementing the content area and grade level plans to replicate the successes. That's actionable, but I think we need to start looking, like Barry said, the analyzing is always going to take place, but we need to look now that we're implementing some of the things that came from that initial analyzing of that data. We need to look forward to the next year's. Now, what are we going to do? We don't just want to keep the same. We'll implement the successes. That will then be a given. In the next years. So we need to look at once we're going to analyze all this data, then specifically what are we going to do with that? So I think this is a good start towards what we as a board, some of the information we would like, but I think we need to start looking for more specifics, what we're going to do with all of that information and how we're going to use that to improve student achievement and decrease the gaps.
Thank you. Also, said one of the challenges that we have is the raw material that we receive. It's not a consistent in terms of what arrives. There's from year to year, right? I mean, so there's a certain piece. You're right that we can improve our processes, and we should, and we will, and we do. One of the challenges that always exists is who are the children that are sitting in front of us, and that becomes that sliding scale in some ways that goes through. But I agree with you. It's even because the plans. So there are pieces and plans that get implemented in a school. There are even things that are replicated from one school to the other. I mean, it is one of the great things that I think that we are starting to do better is talking amongst the groups and the levels about what goes on and where are the successes and how can it be replicated. What does it mean? But on the same side, it's also the same reason that that we teach the alphabet and the sounds in kindergarten. Even though we've gotten really good at it, we can't stop doing it. Because the kids that are coming in still need that. There are certain things in third grade that need to occur because developmentally that's where those kids are. No matter how good we get at it, it still is going to need to be done year to year. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Eric?
On goal number 1, one thing that I would like to suggest is, we do the analyze. I understand that you have to analyze it and all that before you can really take actionable steps. One thing I don't feel like, at least I've been as privy to, maybe it's more in CNI, is actually seeing how the performance is. I've kind of gone through and done my own research, homework, etc. But it would be nice to have that information kind of published so we know where we're at, if it's very clear where we're at within our schools, within our peer groups, etc. And I haven't really, in years past I've seen it, but not recently have I seen that. So I would say, on an annual basis, we're going to report out where we stand district-wise, whatever that benchmark we want to use, whether it's Park or other benchmarks that we want to report out and see, where we stand, if we made progress, if we haven't made progress, based on whatever that benchmark that we report out on.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
So I'm going to pick on one specifically just because it just sticks out to me as kind of telling for some of the other items, but review and revise the technology plan with an emphasis on curriculum and instruction. I would be surprised if we didn't do that every year anyway. That seems to me like an item that you add to a to-do list because you're going to check it off and you feel good by checking that one off. To me, a goal should be, what are we trying to do with technology? Are we trying to provide one-on-one technology to students that may not have access to that technology at home? Are we trying to move towards one-on-one technology for everybody, and what steps are happening into there? Or can we develop a plan? Yes, there are resources that we don't have. There are things that we can't get there, but can we have an aspirational goal that moves us towards something? If we're not reviewing our technology plan every year, then something's wrong. If we're not examining ways to cut costs with our contracts, with things in the budget, we're doing something wrong. So some of these items just feel like they have to be happening. They're not kind of the goal-setting kind of aspirational kind of things that I would hope to see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So as the things, Ms. Thompson, you talk about review and revise, the plan with an emphasis on curriculum instruction, I would expect one-to-one, do we go to Google Suite, that all of those would be part of that discussion, to go through. So it's even part of the discussion of, should we have smart boards in every first grade classroom in the district? Should we have, remember there was a part of the technology plan a number of years ago, was we're going to put smart boards in all fifth grade classrooms, then go to fourth grade classrooms, and then, to go through. Ultimately, they got revised in terms of what took place. So again, some of it becomes part of that, part of the large scale that goes on, right? That big global picture, that 40,000 foot view that you all are taking, and then actually the piece to go in. So I'm always hesitant, and this becomes the part of the practical reality of, and I love the word aspiration. I love the word aspirational goals. In fact, as we work with Russ Qualia during the course of the year, one of his big things is about, the aspiring high and, that kind of stuff to go in. The challenge with putting truly aspirational goals in a district like ours is what does that mean? If the aspirational, like we put in here to implement a one-to-one technology plan during this year, like that can't be a goal because you know what I mean, to go through. Or if we put it out there that's one of the goals, what does that mean in terms of success? It's one of my debate years ago when I started at High School West. We had a big discussion about SAT scores, and what the average SAT scores were at West, were at East, were at other schools in this area. So one of the things that was put to me as the high school principal was, you need to raise the average SAT score. And part of my pushback was, is that the end? Is the end that I need to raise? I guarantee if the board came to me and said, Joe, you need to raise the average SAT scores at both of our high schools next year, I guarantee you I can do it. But my follow-up question is, as long as you don't ask me about the number of kids that take it or about who takes it, in terms of what goes on, because I guarantee I can increase it. The same kids are not going to take it, in terms of what's there. So it becomes that bigger piece, and this is part of my struggle as superintendent, is looking at, I want it to be goals that are real and that are authentic in terms of the actual work, but I don't want it just to be box checking like you talk about, because there are certain things. That's why I said, create a cost-effective budget. Absolutely. Should we be doing that? We should be doing all of these things, but there's also the charge of the district to set goals and to have those goals and have, like I talked about before, areas of focus for the discussion that you all as board members have in committee and as a large group with the administrative liaison and that touch-base piece, that's there, because all of these things, should absolutely be going on in terms of what it is. But this provides a name and a face and for lack of a better thing, words for us to put out there and to refer back to. We can always turn back, it's like the reason for revising the mission statement. We should be talking about it all the time. Here's the mission, that's why it's on here. This is what we have to refer back to. But I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson, in terms of where it is. You would expect that the technology plan would be revised, so the implementation of it certainly is revised. But remember, we work in a compliance-based field with both state and feds in terms of what they're. There's certainly a piece of box checking with compliance that occurs in some ways. Then there's actual implementation that occurs, which I want it to be authentic. You look thoughtful, Mrs. Seidel.
Well, I feel like it's sort of redundant to what some other people said, but I'm going to call out a specific point on here. For example, the implementation of the next generation science standard. So we know that the initial implementation through K-5 is happening this year. So to me, that's a reasonable goal because that has to happen. But it's the second part that was sort of giving me pause, because I know from our work in C&I that we already have some feedback and information about how the implementation, at least at the high school, went from last year. So, and I know that Mr. Goldthorpe, I think, actually made some changes to professional development as a result of that. So in this particular example, why wouldn't we elaborate on that? Like we already did some of that review of that implementation and are making some changes as a result. So why wouldn't we list those changes as our goal for this year?
Good question. Thank you. So a couple of pieces in response to think about. One is, as we list these, is areas of focus, right, that we want to talk about and put out there that this is where we are. Because the other things that could be listed under here, and you as a board, approved to impanel curriculum committees in mathematics and in language arts and in history that are also meeting, that met last year, they're meeting this summer, they're meeting this coming year. We've had folks across the hall over the last couple of weeks that that have been looking at the implementation of English language arts at the elementary level. All of those different pieces, because it becomes. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, Dr. Mahan should be more than happy to get back up and just talk about what the curriculum folks are doing that are there, but it becomes that manageable piece. So what are the areas of focus that we involve at this level of the discussion, as opposed to what's the daily work that goes on in just a regular piece that's there? And I think it's finding that balance. So, we list this in here, articulation of the blueprint for student success, and then these are the areas of focus that are being discussed. But this certainly is not inclusive of all the work that's going on or coming through. You know, some of this is you know, remember our daily practice when you all, as a board through the collective bargaining process, we added the additional 30 minutes onto the academic day, or onto the day. At the secondary level, middle school and high school, that became instructional time for the children. At the elementary level, that became professional time for staff. You know, so there's a certain piece that occurs during the PLC discussion, and there are calendars that are published every month at all 12 of the elementary schools that involves this work. It's truly looking at authentic student data, you know, and how are we implementing the curriculum that goes on. You know, when you boil it down into an actual end unit in terms of what it goes, like there are some incredibly authentic examples that would incorporate a great deal of what goes on in this goal, you know, as 3 first grade teachers or 3 third grade teachers at Kingston or Kilmore or Sharp are sitting together, you know, on a Wednesday morning from 8:15 to 8:45. So again, it becomes that, you know, how much do we list? Now, when I started, and Miss Adrian will tell you, when we started in the district, there were board goals that were listed that were, I mean, there were hundreds of bullet points, you know, to go through. But there was a different perspective on what does that look like and how much volume, you know, to go in.
Right, and I appreciate that, and that makes sense. I guess I was focused in on this particular one because I feel like it's a relatively new goal, and I feel it's one that's small enough that we could potentially follow it through to completion, right? You know, here we rolled out next gen science standards in 2015, 2016. In 2016, 2017, here's what we learned. In 2017, 2018, here's what we revised. And then the following year, here's what we tweaked again. Like, for me, I'd love to see one goal sort of flow through the process and see data and statistics and success at the end of it. So that's kind of why I'm just personally focused in on that one, because I think it's easy because it just started. But I totally get your point.
And I appreciate that, Ms. Seidel. You know, again, the challenges that become, you know, with them. So some of the easy goals in terms of, as I've looked at this historically, remember last year, I went back through the goals over the course of the last 10 years, and we boiled down what were the big things that came up. Some of the ones that visibly that were easy to look at were to say, we have 21 SDA projects. We're going to successfully accomplish those. And at the end, I could tell you 21 SDA projects are done. Let's go look at the boilers. Let's look at the generators, you know, that kind of thing. The reality in terms of the other goals, remember, as the school district, one of the goals is that we produce children, you know, who are going to be contributing members of society and ultimately who graduate from high school. And if that's our primary goal, which I will contend is our primary goal, is to graduate kids from high school that can be contributing members of society, whether it's a job or college or the military, we're incredibly successful. You know, the rest of them, and that's a group that goes out. We just sent 900 plus kids out, and you know, on June 15th, there's an end, right? So we can measure that. What was the graduation rate, you know, for those schools, and then look at what that goes through. The majority of the rest of it that goes through, especially in that area, is it's ongoing. Right? There is no end. Like there will not be an end of, you know, the revision of the world language program or the revision of the science program, but are the areas of focus to talk about publicly and to use. And that's where I come back with where we are. The rest of it is going to be an ongoing cycle, you know, in terms of what's there. You know, again, as we've looked at the stuff when we talk about referendum in September 25th of 2018, you know, and where we've been, you know, what was the discussion with the elementary redistricting committee that met in 1997? What was the high school committee that met prior to that? What were those things that went on? You know, it was the schools were all about 30 years old, you know, and the question of, is the education the same as it was in the 1980s? What's the difference between East and West? You know, some of the folks in the press, you know, they put really good stories out there recently where they've talked about the East-West divide. You know, I think I shared with you the article, you know, about the young man from East and the young man from West who started a Cherry Hill United, Students United piece, right? Where they went through because they were tired of board members and administrators talking about there's a divide between the schools, or, you know, there's a fray between East and West. And that was in the 1990s. You know, it's most of the discussions, right, they're cyclical discussions that come through. How we quantify, again, back to the task at hand with where we are, how do we quantify them on paper in terms of what's it look like for areas of focus? That's, you know, the discussion. But I appreciate that, Lisa.
So I think then maybe for me, just in my mind, is that as a board, we should ask for more detailed data in our committee meeting. So for example, on the science thing, like, okay, so we know we started this program last year at the high school where it's a different curriculum path, right? They're starting at biology as opposed to CPS or QPS. So let's look at student data for the previous 4 years, kids that had that versus kids that don't. And how does that compare? And what's the positive about these next gen science standards? What's the differences? Like, that's, I'm not articulating it very well, but that's what I'd love to see about the next gen science standards. It sounds fabulous and everybody's on board with it. Let's see the data to show that the first year was successful, or maybe not, and why. But I'd like to see those types of summaries, I guess, in response to these goals.
And I think there's a piece that has to occur at the committee meetings, and this is where, as the administrative liaisons, you know, as we organize information, we present information to you all, that there has to be regular updates on these, right? If these are what we agree that, you know, that you as a board adopt and submit as the goals, you know, for the student achievement, you know, and again, primarily fit underneath CNI, you know, should Dr. Mahan and Dr. Campisi be providing regular updates? And absolutely. You know, and we can talk about what does that look like in terms of the updates. Do I think they can go into detail about each one of these bullets at each one? No, nor should they necessarily. You know, and we have some dates. You know, the world language one. There's a date in there for an update in October, so that's been formalized to go through. You know, and that kind of thing. You know, when Mrs. Sugars, you know, when they go through with the budget piece and give an update on where are we with the food service and where are we with that piece, or technology. You know, the contracted services. You know, there's no reason that should not be or cannot be or will not be, you know, part of the committee meeting discussion that goes on. Again, in terms of clarity, as we move through 2016, 2017, one of the easiest ones for us to follow was the Cherry Hill 2020, right? Because again, it was a specific actionable piece that had an end. It was not an arbitrary end, which a lot of the goals, as we talk about, because of the reality of the year, July 1st to June 30th, June 30th is an arbitrary end. You know, and we're measuring our achievement of those goals by typically June 1st. That 2020 plan, you know, and that's where Lynn and I did the presentation at the end of May. You know, you guys agreed to the goal. You adopted a plan in September that laid out what it was going to look like for 10 months. We hit each of those benchmarks as we went through the 10 months, you know, to go in, you know, to do. Because again, there's a real end. There's a tangible real end to, you know, going in to vote on September 25th of 2018. That's real. You know, the rest of the pieces that build up into that, you know, are the discussions to go in. And you see, look, it even says in here, follow and implement the timeline of events to be prepared for referendum vote on September 25th, 2018. Because we want to make sure everybody's aware. So next steps then, so we will, the administrative folks and I will go through and look at language. We'll put out on Thursday, adjusted. You know, that'll go through. It'll go out to everybody in the memo. If you have thoughts, considerations, additional questions, you know, send them through. If need be, we'll make additional adjustments and send it out on the 19th, right? On the 20th would be the next Thursday memo, you know, because ideally, in my mind, I will ask you to adopt on July the 25th, all right? If you get home tonight or tomorrow and you're like, I wish I would have, send an email. Right? Let Barry know. Barry and Eric and I will be together Thursday morning. You know, so we certainly have discussion then as well. Right? What's that? You're right.
Mrs. Judge.
Not a question.
New business?
No, not a new business, but for strategic planning, that maybe it would be a good idea to have the township come to one of our future meetings to talk about like we used to do with Paul Stridick, but not in August because I'm not going to be there in August.
Nor will
I. He used to bring us information about the community development
and what they estimated population-wise, kid-wise, etc.,
right.
and all that.
And what the progress was on the current development and what anticipated development they had throughout the township over the next couple of years.
Yes, Mr. Bart and Mrs. Sugars and I will have a conversation about scheduling that and getting that going through.
Who is that now in the township that Paul Stridick has left?
Yeah, Mr. Stridick's, his position was replaced. It's somebody that had been at the township. I believe she had been there before. Her name escapes me at the moment,
Okay.
but we'll provide. But there is somebody who is
Okay.
there. But we'll have somebody from the township come through.
Okay. Any public comment on anything else this evening? Anybody hiding out there? Everybody's at home watching the MLB All-Star game. That's why nobody's here tonight. All right. Motion to adjourn. Mrs. Judge, Mr. Goodwin. Good night, everybody.